Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It being 5:30, I'd like to call the zoning subcommittee meeting to order. Would the clerk please call the roll? Here?
Here.
So Rourke.
Here.
3 present.
Thank you. I'd like to acknowledge City Manager Murphy, Eric Slagle from Inspectional Divisional Services, and Christine McCall here as well. Thank you very much for being here. And we have some residents from the public who've been following this. We had our last meeting May 2nd. It's hard to believe it's been that long, but thank you for being here. We'll certainly open it up for public discussion. We have two things on the agenda this evening. The first is to review the proposed zoning amendments from Developmental Services. Again, the last meeting was May 2nd. And the other is the marijuana zoning proposal. What I would like to suggest to my colleagues is that we acknowledge receipt of the marijuana zoning proposal so that it reflects in the minutes that we did have it before us this evening, and just table that for the next meeting.
So moved. Yeah.
So moved by Council Belanger, seconded by Council Rourke. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, it's a vote. Thank you. So again, we're here this evening to continue our discussion regarding the proposed zoning changes. What I'd like to do is ask the manager to just give us an update as to where we are, then I will certainly open it up for the public. I know there's been discussion, especially on the accessory dwelling unit language. So if it's okay with my colleagues, we'll refer to the city manager.
Yes, basically, if you want us to go through the ones bit by bit, or if you have questions, whatever.
Okay, we actually have done that in the
Yeah.
past. I mean, I would certainly defer to the public if you'd like to have, come
Overview.
forward first to, to get an overview. Okay, is that okay? We'll
Yeah,
have,
that's
okay.
fine, yeah.
Two, we just have two, okay.
Thank you, Mr.
Good evening,
Chairman.
John, thank you.
John Hamlet, 495 Varnum Avenue, and more a question than a statement. We had discussed at our last meeting a number of possible changes to the existing or the proposed ADU wording. Sister and brother was going to be added to the relatives. There was a consideration of limiting the number of ADUs. Do we have an updated description of the regulation based on the hour-long conversation we had previously?
We do not, we do not this evening, no.
Okay.
We were waiting for a kind of a final
Okay.
decision on the
Okay.
subcommittee
Okay.
as to whether or not to include those changes or not.
Okay.
We have them written down. That certainly wouldn't be an onerous task.
Quick turnaround to get
turn
them out.
around if it was going to be in front of the council.
Okay, okay.
So do we have a list of the possible or proposed changes that were, what I'm trying to do is take the 1-hour meeting that we had
Right.
already on this and condense it to 5 minutes and then start from that conversation instead of going all the way back to the
Okay.
beginning.
Do you have the notes from that last meeting?
I did not bring the notes from the last meeting, but my recollections are, as Mr. Hamlin has mentioned, that we were going to add other family members to the existing list. We were going to add a requirement to place a bond for the reversal of the property. Also, Councilor Belanger had requested that we change the length of time that a permit would be granted for this from 3 years to 1, so it would be an annual renewal and an annual inspection. And I believe those were the kind of the major changes that we had discussed, and we were just kind of waiting on the whether or not the board was interested.
Yeah, my memory's not that good. I have a few notes, just see if any of them ring a bell. Eric, you seem to have a better grasp on this. I have Eric-enforceability ? Was that something that we discussed or looked at? I'm asking. It's a note that I have.
Yes, I mean, we talked about the questions of the enforceability. We had a long discussion about whether or not this would be enforceable, and I believe that the concerns expressed by the public, and I think by members of the subcommittee, were that we have a mechanism in place via the bond and the annual inspections to make sure that we could have a more enforceable ordinance. If it's not enforceable, it's going to create the problems.
Okay.
That I think.
But there weren't any specific enforceability provisions that came out of that you recall?
Other than the reducing the times of the inspections to 1 year instead
Yeah.
of 3 years, and the adding of a bond requirement to when you
Okay.
pulled your permit.
I've got something in here that says same property valuation or same property values Does anybody recall?
That was a discussion.
Was-
Yeah, that was a discussion about whether or not the assessor's office was going to treat this that now as a two-family and assess it as a two-family as opposed to assessing it as a single-family. And I believe the answer is they're going to assess what is there. So when you put in an in-law unit, you will have a two-family and will be taxed as such.
Okay.
Once you go to remove the in-law unit at the end of the term when it's allowed, you will revert to a single-family tax for taxation purposes.
Great. Then the last two, what happens when the family leaves? So you have an additional dwelling unit and it's got to be a family member. What happens when they leave?
Well, that's
Is that something we addressed?
at that point, it would have to be restored to a single family.
Correct.
Okay, great. And is that included in the
I believe that's contemplated
wording?
in the bond section, but we can make it explicit that,
That would
at
be
a change
great.
of ownership, you'd have to,
Okay. And then the last note I have under this one was limiting the number of additional dwelling units. And I think was, can you have more than one? And if you can, how many, or
no,
what's the
it's
formula?
one.
Is that stated? Or could we have it stated?
We can certainly make it more explicit. Yes, I mean, that would be an easy.
Those were all my notes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you,
Thank you,
John.
Eric.
The chair would like to recognize Councilor Mercia. Thank you, Councilor. Good evening, Deb.
Good evening. Okay, so to follow up on that, I think I'm going to be much more simple in this, is that the changes he was talking about to be considered are for the areas that a accessory dwelling is already allowed. And the second part is we're asking that you not change where they're allowed. Because on here it says accessory dwelling unit added to a single-family home. It's not allowed in residential, or is it, let's see, TSF? R&R, TSF is allowed. So R&R is no, requesting that does not change. And USF says, no, it's NB, do not change. And then there's UMU, DMU, HRC, and institutional. So there's a whole list of areas that the city does not allow it. So we just want to make sure that any changes you're going to be making to accessory dwellings, you do not change the zoning. So it says accessory dwelling unit added to a single-family home. Well, if that's in a residential area and it's not allowed, we're asking you not to change that. So.
If I could, are these accessory use dwelling modifications different than the current zoning? Because, again, I'm looking at it, the SSF, and that's a yes.
Right, so so accessory dwelling units are not allowed right now. So
Okay.
this is,
Right.
we'd be creating a table that is shown at the bottom of the first page that would allow it, I mean, because it's only allowed in a single-family home, so it would be allowed in the SSF, allowed in the TSF and the TTF, and allowed in the USF.
Okay.
And then allowed by a special permit before the planning board in the multifamily districts in the city.
Okay.
Okay, so now that that's clear, then the feedback that we got from the group and neighbors is that's not something that people want. It's just another way to have affordable housing. There's no way for the city to be able to manage another ordinance. We already have enough, say this the right way. We just don't feel to add one more ordinance that you're going to have to monitor and police. Because right now, the ordinances that we have are very difficult to monitor and police. And we've been before you in many, many avenues with problems with homes being rooming houses, people doing illegal 2-family and 3-families. This is an ongoing issue through the city. And especially if we're in a college town, the burden is there. And so what happens is that as a resident, you end up being policing your neighborhood. And I don't think that that's how we should be enforcing ordinances. So the ones that we have now are difficult enough. To add one more burden on the city, especially in a single-family neighborhood, allowing people to add an accessory dwelling that won't be taxed differently and much harder to monitor, because there are illegal 2- and 3-family homes all throughout the city. And we've also had the issues of people turning their homes into rooming houses. So that now that it's clear, when I looked at the bottom, I thought, wow, there are areas for it. That's what it looked like to me. And now I'm finding out what you're doing is creating a whole new ordinance and a whole new way of the city to be able to have secondary housing. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to segue right into the air nabs, because the tourist homes, it's the same issue, whereas the residents in the neighborhoods where tourist homes are going to be, you won't be able to tell the difference between if it's a rooming house, a 2-family, a multi-family, to turn around and have the city take the burden of having to monitor another ordinance and having people in the neighborhood be the only eyes and ears if you see that they're operating as a tourist house. It's just opening up a whole bunch of issues. And where we're saying in a city of 105,000 people, we already have a burden of having to enforce the ordinances that we have right now. And we're here quite a bit at the neighborhood subcommittee meetings, safety meetings, having issues with trying to enforce the ordinances we already have. So I just wanted to say that it's not something that the neighbors or the neighborhoods are supporting, and I just wanted to make sure that you knew that. And I also know that Nancy Judge wants to talk about and elaborate how the ordinances, because you can't monitor them, and the burden on the city that a lot of people are turning their homes into rooming houses. Thank you.
Thank you, Deb. The chair would like to recognize Councilor Elliott is here. Thank you, Councilor, for being here. Would you like to? Hi, Nancy.
Hi. Do you want me to state my
Yes,
name?
Sure. Yes, please.
Nancy Judge, Highlands Neighborhood Association. And I'm actually here in support of all the neighborhoods, but I also did bring one of our neighbors who has had an issue for some time. So I'd like to ask Bob Hunt to come up to the microphone.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening. Bob Hunt, 48 Florence Avenue, Lowell, Massachusetts. I was here probably a month or so ago. It was the safety meeting. A house across the street from me, basically a 2-family house, had decided to get into the roommate business. And the roommate business has basically continued to evolve into, we've had a former bank robber live there. We recently had an OD there. And just last week, one of the roommates decided to take their ankle bracelet off it, and the police came and had to arrest them. The enforcement is very poor on this because it's very vague as to whether they're roommates, whether they're living there. There's no verification with the city. There's no occupancy or anything like that that happens. And I'm basically here to, oppose this whole thing. I don't like it at all.
Okay,
Based on what's happened to me and what I've seen, I've lived in the city for 62 years. I've lived in the house on 48 Florence Avenue for 40 years, and I've never seen it as bad as it is right now.
Now, is the house in question, is that a 2-family or?
Yes, it is. It's a 2-family.
It's a 2-family.
And they don't even rent the bottom yet. So theoretically, the traditional 2-family has 3 or 4 bedrooms. There could be 3 or 4 roommates on each floor if they decide to really try and maximize the profit on the place.
Is it owner occupied? I know that might be.
It is.
It is.
It
Interesting.
is.
Okay.
Yep, it is.
Okay. I'm sure the administration is aware of the property. Okay. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. The chair would also like to recognize Christine O'Connor, our solicitor, is here. Thank you. At this point, I don't know if the administration has anything to add or any suggestions. I'm wondering if we should divide the question. I don't know if we should separate out the tourist home and the accessory dwelling. Are there any other issues in the packet itself that the residents would like to address this evening? I know we actually took 2 items out, and we moved those forward, and they actually have already been approved, if you recall.
There was one other one we covered very quickly at the end,
Okay.
and Councilor Belanger, I think, supported it, and that was reducing the required parking requirements if you had a bike rack.
Okay,
And we just saw that as a way for developers to get around. It's section 1.5, 6.1.5, number 1, notes to parking, and it has bike racks, paragraph B. And we would like to see that, we'd like to see that not included in the changes. We don't want to see a reduction in required parking if you put a bike rack on your property. Do you recall that, Councilor Belanger? You,
I do.
okay, yeah.
it's right here.
Yeah, okay.
6.1.5, okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
6.1, thank you.
Thank you all. At this point, what's the wish of the members? Oh, I'm sorry. We have any more speakers? No? Okay. Mr. Manager?
Yes, I was talking to Mr. Slagle beforehand. Maybe the best thing to do would be to separate the controversial ones, the accessory dwelling
In the tourist home?
and the tourist home, and then just forward the others together.
Okay.
Because those seem, with the changes.
With
that
the
we
change
made,
relative to the
with the
parking.
change with the parking. We'll take the bike racks out, but the ordinance could be drafted, and that would be followed for the non-controversial ones, and then the controversial ones could be taken up each
Okay.
on their own.
Okay. Councilor Rourke?
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I don't need a motion for that. I make a motion to put those forward to be written up.
Second?
Any further discussion? Again, just so Councilor Elliott. Yes, sir.
So I think that's a good idea to take those 2 items out and continue to, pursue the other ordinances. But what would be the resolution to some of these issues, and particularly with the Airbnb and the accessory dwelling? Because I do think, and I agree with the neighbors and Mr. Hunt, it's a growing problem that's growing every day. And, you, Mr. Manager, have sent, I've sent a couple of emails, and almost in the same area, quite frankly, with the roommate situation, and people are just thumbing their nose at the officials. It's almost catch me if you can. And while we need to enforce it, it's, we're going to be chasing our tail after this. So is the solution to specify the number of people that are allowed to live in a household that are unrelated? I mean, I can tell you, there are situations on my street of similar nature. They're single families, and there's multiple living in there, which, I get, but it's at what point, or how do we address it, I suppose, without having to, and we just had a debate last night, enforcement. There's only so many resources we have. So is there some, what can we do so it's not neighbors looking, policing their neighborhoods all the time? So particularly just on these 2 issues, I mean, I think moving forward we should, but I don't want to delay this too much. Airbnb, they're popping up. I mean, you go on their website and they're popping up all over the place. So I know I had a lot of questions there, Mr. Manager.
Right now, the ordinance says that not more than 3 unrelated persons can reside in the same unit. So we do have existing. I think that's pretty fair and reasonable. So that's what we can to enforce. What we were trying to get at, though, was the Airbnb, to try and regulate the Airbnbs that were popping up.
Yeah, so I don't want there to be any misunderstanding of the goal of this. The tourist home, the Airbnb regulation was an attempt for us to regulate them, to require people to restrict the locations where they can happen, require them to get special permits and have to go before the planning board. So we were actually increasing the regulations on Airbnbs. It wasn't an attempt to legalize them. I would defer to I don't even know whether or not an Airbnb has a legal status in a residential neighborhood. That's something I don't know that the law department's even looked at, but it's.
So, Mr. Chair, so the city of Worcester just adopted, I believe, an ordinance because of so many universities in Worcester, and they were having a an issue with it. So I'm not sure if that's something that we should look at or not, but, and I don't think it's just, well, I guess it's university driven because people want to come and visit and they stay, but I can just see this thing spiraling
Thank you.
right out of control.
Thank you. Manager Murphy?
If we did separate the issues, we could look into the Worcester ordinance and maybe make some recommendations relative to that one ordinance when it does come up.
Okay, okay.
We could probably incorporate some of the provisions in the Worcester ordinance into this
Then
one.
bring it back.
Bring it
Okay,
back to you.
Okay. Okay, any further debate? We have a motion on the floor.
I interrupted the city
Okay.
solicitor, Mr. Chair. Could we have, did you have something to weigh in on, or whether it's, we can regulate or not?
No, we can wait and see what the Worcester ordinance, and obviously, the regulations are intended to capture some of those instances that our zoning ordinances currently would not capture, specifically with something like an Airbnb. And so as Mr. Slagle had noted, these regulations are intended to help regulate what is happening all over the country.
Okay, okay. Yes,
Mr.
Councilor
Chair,
Elliott.
thank you. So can I just jump back to the roommate issue? How, do we have to literally, I mean, do inspectors have to go to these units and say, can I see a license? And is that literally how it has to prove?
That would be, the burden of proof would be on the city if we're trying to write a violation saying that they violated that. So we would have to obtain sufficient evidence that there were more than 3 unrelated. As you can imagine, that's sometimes difficult to do because cousins don't necessarily have the same last name. Their driver's license doesn't indicate who you're related to. So it's a challenge. People are often forthcoming about not being related, and that gives them sometimes sufficient evidence, but it is a challenging thing.
Well, it is a challenge, and I think we're gonna lose that battle. I mean, I will say there was an issue on Livingston Ave, and the inspector went up there, I want to say a half a dozen times, and they just continued to skirt the issue, and, it's important to do it, but at what point is it not a good, it's a good use of our resources, but it's an excessive use for something, and it was the same situation. It was drug dealing, and it was, other activity going on.
And keep in mind that also, we're dealing with my inspectors in development services work during a certain finite period of time during the day.
Right.
Folks are often not at home or won't let them in. It is a problem, and it's challenging to deal with.
I'm sure we're not the only ones dealing with this. What do other communities do we know?
Yeah.
I believe that they're dealing with the same problems and having the same challenges in doing enforcement.
Okay,
I think is
thank you, Mr. Chair.
Deb?
I just wanted to ask, like, next time you have the zoning subcommittee in the agenda, when you announce it, can you put in there that we're going to be meeting for the tourist homes and we're going to be meeting for
Sure.
accessory dwellings? And then I had a question, is who decided 3? If you can have 3 unrelated people, like who
That's in the current zone.
That's in the current
That's
zoning.
in
It's been
current.
there for,
Okay, so current zoning can be changed.
yes.
Correct.
Okay, so let's change it. The thing is, there's a house in Pawtucketville that someone just bought, and it has 3 bedrooms, and they were advertising 6 roommates. So people are actively doing it. So it just seemed to me like, you can't monitor because you said, well, they can have up to 3 people. Well, then change it.
Well, again, it's a good time, if we're separating those, we can come back with language that can deal just with what you're just commenting on, to change
Okay.
it from 3 to
But the
some of them
ordinance right
together.
now that allows, what's that ordinance called? Under what heading is that you can have 3 people non-related?
That's in the definition section under single-family dwelling units.
Okay,
Family
so
unit, I believe.
if we can add that to this, as far as changing it, going from 3 to 2 might help, or there has to be a way to stop people from making their homes rooming houses. And 3 is excessive, I think. You can have 3 people, and what
And
they're doing...
unrelated, right, and unrelated.
And they put locks on the doors. I mean, I'm a realtor. I go in and you can see they have locks on the doors. And if you can have 3, then that means you can end it. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. So again, we do have a motion on the floor to separate out to be clear, we're going to separate out the accessory dwelling unit, the tourist home, and move forward with the rest of the proposal minus the 6.1.5 notes on the parking table that John had brought up. Counselor
I think,
Ward.
can I ask just a couple of questions about the accessory dwelling units to the manager? So, take me to the process with regards to these rules, or with regards to doing it. If someone wanted to do this, I'll tell you why, one of the reasons why I filed it. So I had, in my neighborhood, I had a young couple with 2 kids, and, unfortunately, the dad passed away at a young age. So, her mother, who lives a few streets up, wants to take them in, because they can't afford the home anymore, and she wanted to build, a place that had a bedroom and a kitchen and something. So if that wants to be the case, how can that be done? If without doing what nobody wants is a rooming house of 15 college students, but if it's if it's an elderly parent, or in this situation, a very sad story where you had someone pass away, what's the process in place if this is adopted?
If this is adopted, so someone would need to come in to file for building permits to do the construction. At that time in our office, we'd have to make a determination, which would be done by the planning staff after a zoning review, as to whether or not the property was in a district that allowed you to do that as a matter of right, or whether you had to go to the planning board to get a special permit. One of those would allow you to just file your building permits, and you would need to comply with the requirements in your building permit packet, i.e. you would need to submit, if we included the bond requirement as was discussed earlier, you would need to submit the bond before you got an occupancy of that unit. You would need to comply with the requirements for then getting an annual review, which would involve a fire inspector and a building inspector going out to the property once every year to review it, make sure that it was still compliant with the remainder of the ordinance, and obtaining documentation from the property owner that the people who lived there were in fact related, and that as part of the certificate of occupancy, certificate of inspection process, the burden would be on the property owner to provide that information. If they didn't have that information, they would be in violation of the ordinance, and that would then that could result in the revocation of their occupancy, which means they couldn't be in the building anymore. In that portion of the building.
And then after that, it'd be yearly inspections of the property.
Yearly inspections of the property, and then when and if the property was going to be sold, they would need to revert it back to a single family. When and if they no longer had another family member in that unit, they would need to convert it back to a single family.
That's the reason for the yearly instead of the once every 3 years?
Yes, and we would put in a requirement that they need to, file the certificate of inspection with the registry of deeds, so it would be on file that this unit's only good for 1 year and only good for an in-law, for family members.
In the very same instances where, if you have elderly parents and one passes away and there's you don't have, not eligible for housing, or you can't afford to pay for senior living, same instance, right, where you have to go through the process and
Correct.
verification and so forth?
Correct.
I just want to make sure there's something in place just for that, and I totally hear the concerns about, college kids and, 8, 10 kids in Holland. I know it happens a lot in Pawtuckaville, next to the university and so forth. But just going, I know we're not going to, I guess, talk about it tonight, but just going forward, something in place where we can guarantee that, the neighborhood remains intact.
Right. And I would say that the goal of this ordinance is to capture the people who are going to do it right.
Right.
And it would require additional enforcement, but nobody's going to put up the money for a bond unless they intended to do it appropriately. Bonds cost money. You're doing renovations of the house. You're also paying for a bond that the city would retain, that we could then cash in. And if they refuse to do it themselves, we would go through the law department to require that that the property be restored to a single-family state.
Now, if I could, if you were to do a title search on a property that met these requirements, would you actually find evidence of the bond and evidence of the approval? Just thinking about, from Deb's perspective, being in real estate, if I was to sell the house, could I try to sell it as an approved in-law or not?
Well, what we would, based on the changes that we had proposed in there, that would indicate it would have to be reverted to a single family before it was transferred in ownership, we would have to, have a document approval that would be recorded at the Registry of Deeds, so that a future owner would know that this is not eligible as a single family. That wouldn't stop that future owner from saying, hey, I happen to have my, father who's going to be living with us, I want to have it as an in-law too, and going through the process to file it for themselves, but at sale, they would have to revert it to a single family. Again, it would, by its very nature, capture the people who needed this and wanted to do it the right way. The people who are doing it illegally,
Do it anyway.
they're not going to turn around and say, oh, I can try to weasel through it this way. They're just going to try to do it illegally, and that's another thing we have.
So you've had people walk into your office and ask to do this, and they've been told it just can't be done.
We have lots of people who come through looking for in-law apartments, and for the instances that you have spoken of, for elderly relatives especially. Yeah.
Accountable manager, and I'll recognize that.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I was just starting to think of that, Eric, as to where does this all stem from for accessory dwelling units? So obviously, can you tell us a little bit about the requests you're getting in your office? Because, Councilor Rourke made a good example. That's a legitimate reason. And I think we want to help families in Lowell if they have a family member who's sick and needs constant care and wants to come home. I do want to give the homeowners of Lowell that right. But there are lots of potential problems that could arise from doing that. So please tell me a little bit how this all came to fruition, this proposal.
Well, as I mentioned to the subcommittee before, Lowell does not allow in-law apartments. There's no mechanism by which you can get an in-law apartment in your property now. It has, for economic reasons, for kind of growing numbers of elderly population reasons, become prevalent during at least my time in development services, that we get regular requests from people about wanting to put in-law apartments. I would say probably 90% of them are the elderly parent scenario, and they're looking to have a way to do it. We inform them that you can't have an in-law apartment in Lowell. There are alternatives that we offer, which is you can add an addition onto your house. It has to be part of the house. It can't be a separate, locking doors in between it. Just, you can add on a separate bedroom, and there's, for legal purposes, you're allowed to put a separate kitchen in your house. That doesn't make something another unit. I think it's the Ernie Bach case that you're allowed to have as many kitchens in your house as you want. So you can put a kitchen, you can put a separate bedroom and a separate sitting area. It just can't be a separate unit. It has to be open and free-flowing between the parts of the house. So lots of people have taken that opportunity. So we do let people know that that's something that they can try to do. But there are some times when what they actually want is just close proximity, but not them living in their house. They want them in an adjacent unit, and in that case, we just have to tell them, that's what you're looking for is a two-family, and there are zones where you can do that in the city, but you can't do it in a single-family zone.
Okay, so it does happen fairly frequently?
Yes, regularly. At least once a month, we have this actual people coming and trying to pull permits for this.
Okay, well, that's, I think going forward, we need to tread very carefully, because we do, again, as I stated earlier, I think the homeowners of Lowell are entitled to that right to take in a family member for whatever reason, whether it's financial or illness or whatever it may be. I mean, as Councilor Elliott stated, people are taking advantage. I mean, they're doing that now without this, but could this potentially open up more of the same, what Councilor Elliott alluded to, people taking advantage, people in Pawtucketville trying to cash in on the university's growth that we're seeing as well in the Highlands. So I think we need to be very, very cautious moving in as to how we're going to do this, Eric. So please, if you can perhaps maybe research a little better to come up with something, but something that obviously protects the neighborhoods first and foremost. But with that being said, so at this point, I'd like to see some more information as to how we're going to go forward on this. That's my opinion as it stands right now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Council Belinda. Deb? Thank you for waiting.
Okay. I'm always glad to hear, like, how do we arrive at something like this that puts a burden on the neighbors and the city? So I just didn't want to leave here tonight thinking that that was something okay. Somebody needs to take in family members. There's always ways to do it without turning it into a separate apartment. That's another way to get affordable housing. I work in Dracut, so Dracut has an accessory dwelling rule, and you can't have a separate entrance. You have to walk into the house. Everybody walks in, and then you can be able to go from the in-law to the family. There's a flow. There's not even a door that stops you. Okay, so really think about this. If that's what the intent is, accessory dwelling is this. You share that house. It's not a separate apartment. So what the challenge is in Dracut, when you give that permit, and I'm a Realtor, you go back 2 years, 3 years, they've covered the walls. There's a separate entrance. The theory that you're going to have these every 3 years, you're going to renew it, you're not going to
Every
be
1
able
year,
to do it again. In theory, it sounds great, but that's not the reality, because I live the reality. And and it ends up being just another way of affordable housing. In the towns, don't go in and make sure that they're still complying. It just doesn't work that way. So the theory sounds good, the reality, it doesn't work out that way. So for every accessory dwelling, the rules that they have in Dracut, you go into that house 2 and 3 years later, walls are up, separate entrances, and it's a separate apartment. So,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Yes, Council Belanger?
If I could make one more comment, Sam. Deb Forgio makes a great point, and that's why when the ordinance was originally proposed, it was a 3-year inspection, Deb, and that didn't sit well with me at all. I mean, anything could happen in the period of 3 years. If a family member was to come in and leave and vacate for whatever reason, the owner is going to say, geez, well, I invested money, it's now an in-law apartment, I'm going to rent it out to now whomever. And that is far too long a grace period, in my opinion. So, yeah, I mean, you make a good point. I'm not even so sure that an annual inspection could keep up on this. I have reservations to that as well, but at the very least, I did not like the appearance of 3-year inspections for reasons that I stated. So, here again.
Okay, thank you. Okay, with that all being said, any other comments? We do have a motion. Would the clerk please call the roll? Yes.
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 Thank you. At this point, we still have time left on the clock if we wanted to talk about any other zoning issues or the marijuana proposal at this particular point, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
City Manager?
In light of the passage of recreational marijuana, is that we wanted to make sure that we propose some zoning ordinances that would regulate the location of these dispensaries and cultivation plants in the city of Lowell. We can't, absent a public referendum on a statewide ballot, we can't ban these dispensaries outright by this zoning bylaw, but we can at least regulate them. I liken this to the zoning bylaw we passed with the adult entertainment zones, is that we couldn't ban adult entertainment outright, but we could put it in locations where it wasn't as a negative to the residents of Lowell as just popping up anywhere. So what we did is, with the great work of Christine McCall, is that we've put together a proposed zoning ordinance that would regulate the location of the dispensaries. And if you could just give a summary of what this ordinance would call for.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Manager. We regulated not only dispensaries, but also the cultivation centers, the testing facilities, all manner of uses, so that even some of them that we can't even think of right now. We obviously didn't put them in residential neighborhoods. We tried to keep it in areas where retail or institutional or industrial uses are already allowed. We also kept in mind that we already have existing medical facilities, cultivation and dispensaries, and with the new legislation, they do have first bite of the apple, so we have to make sure that any proposed area where we allow these uses is consistent with if they want to convert as well. We had a department head meeting sort of discussing the major concerns. The number one concern is going to be security, so that's a lot of what our special permit criteria is about, protecting not only the businesses themselves, but the customers and the neighborhood. We wanted to make sure, one of the tricky parts is that we really can't ban anything. We have to regulate it. So we're trying to get ahead of it as much as possible, using our imaginations a little bit, because it's not, the Cannabis Control Commission is not fully staffed or fully regulated with their application process. So a lot of this is in flux, but we're trying to stay ahead of it as much as possible, and protecting the neighborhoods and the security of these buildings is our number one priority.
Okay, thank you.
Would
Mr.
you-
Manager?
Would you just explain what zoning districts we're proposing to allow dispensaries and cultivation?
And could you talk a little bit about testing, too? I'm not sure what testing means, where it's allowed in light industrial and...
Sure. So for cultivation, we are going to allow by special permit in the regional retail, the high-rise commercial, office park, light industrial, and general industrial. Testing facilities are the same, regional retail, high-rise commercial, institution. Well, we included institution because it's mostly lab. It's with the creation, the state is going to have to create like a seed to sale follow,
Okay.
much like the Alcohol Commission. So we thought that would be a good area because it's more scientific. The office park, light industrial, and general industrial. Medical dispensaries are also allowed in the regional retail, and the office park, both by special permit. The recreational dispensaries, which is allowed by special permit in the regional retail, the office park by special permit, and that's it. And those are existing, well, the medical dispensary area is existing in the high-rise commercial, so we do have a caveat that with the existing dispensary, medical dispensary, will be allowed to convert in that area, but no other dispensaries would be there.
Could you
Thank you.
also explain that we further, they just can't open up anywhere in a regional retail district because it's further constricted by location? So could
We
you
also
explain
have
that?
criteria. So 1,000 feet of another existing registered marijuana use. So not just, you can't have a retail and a cultivation center within 1,000 feet of each other. It's all marijuana uses. 500 feet from a public or private elementary school, middle school, secondary school, or any college, where any student population is under 21. 500 feet of public parks, and I believe that's, yeah, and that's it. That's
Okay.
the additional restrictions we imposed.
Okay. And what about enforcement? How often would these dispensaries be visited by inspectional services?
Yeah. We actually discussed this with the chief of police, and it's something that's not in the special permit criteria, but was something that we're trying to flesh out is that part of a security plan,
Okay.
which is required a special permit, and we decided that we think it should be an annual review, and so far
That's where we
what
are.
we're working
Okay.
with.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from, no? Actually, yep, Council Belanger?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, Christine, when is the Commonwealth, is it July 1 of 2018 where they're able to open the doors?
April 1 of 2018, the Cannabis Control Commission will start accepting applications,
Okay,
and then it's June 1st, they will start issuing licenses. And once a entity who is interested in opening in Lowell, once they apply with the CCC, we have 90 days to respond to the CCC to say these are our regulations to make sure that they fit in with what we want. And then on top of that, they'll still have to get their special permits and site plans. But we've already decided and have it in our regulations that they have to be fully licensed by the state before they can even apply. We don't want any influx.
yep. Now, what can we do to control the number of dispensaries? I know it's somehow related to the amount of liquor licenses, so how does that work? And again, can we control the number in the city at the very least?
We can limit it, because we are a yes community, we can cap it at a number that's greater than 20% of the number of package stores, which for us is 22. So we have to cap it up higher than 5.
Higher than-
If we pick higher than 5, we can do it without a ballot initiative. It's less than 5. At least that's how I understand the interpretation, so I definitely want to double check with.
Well,
the
also in the
law.
existing law is that the chief executive officer has to sign off on the letter to the Department of Public Health and enter into a host agreement. So we're hoping that the Cannabis Commission requires the same regulations relative to the dispensaries.
Okay, so according to my arithmetic, please correct me, is we have to have allow a minimum of 5, maximum of 22.
No, I'm sorry, I might have misspoke. We can't regulate we can't limit it more than 20% of what we allow for, less than 20% of what we have. So
Okay.
we allowed 22, so we can't restrict it less than 20% of that 22. So as long as it's over 5, we can do that by ordinance, not through ballot.
Okay, well, that's good news, so that's somewhat promising going forward, but I like your proposal. And I think we need to, I know we're not going to get an answer this evening, but I think we're a little behind on this issue due to the high school and other issues that obviously absorbed a lot of time this calendar year. But we need to get going sooner rather than later, so we have control. We can't let this thing get ahead of us, and these things are popping up where we don't want them. So I like your original proposal. We'll fine tune it more as we go forward, but again, I think time is becoming of the essence. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Manager Murphy, then Councilor
I
Elliott.
would just call your attention to, you provided the map with the proposal, did you, to the members?
No, the map was
Okay.
not submitted.
Okay.
I did get one.
Okay, we will, I think you should pay special note to the map, because it does delineate that it is very constricted. It's not they're gonna be able to open up anywhere like any retail, but it is very constricted, and we'll supply that map to every member of the city council, so you can see where they are.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Manager.
Councilor Elliott.
That was my question, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to get an understanding of the locations of these regional retail districts. And can you give us an example? Is it one or is it several districts?
So the regional retail, for instance, Roger Street is regional retail. There-
Can you describe regional retail? Just for people at
Regional
home?
retail is
And
intended is intended to be kind of your classic larger scale retail zone. Things like car dealerships, Kmart, kind of larger parking lots, strip malls, that's what we envision as regional retail. There's an area of regional retail right off the connector at Plain Street. There's an area of regional retail again on Roger Street. There's one on Upper Bridge Street. There's an area of regional retail, and Middlesex Street, I believe, has an area of regional
And
retail.
what was the thought behind it? What was the logic for selecting regional retail districts?
Well, the idea would be that, number one, those are the districts that, because this is going to be retail, recreational marijuana, they're the districts that are most appropriate for volume of traffic, uses where you have lots of customers coming and going. If you think of the stretch of Middlesex Street, basically from the bridge down towards the Work Bridge, from the Work Bridge up, that's a regional retail district. So that those are the kinds of uses. They're typically not particularly close to residential sections, and kind of as a use, it would seem to fall more appropriately into a kind of a retail section of the city.
Okay.
But I think the map is going to be especially helpful to your understanding, because it's one thing to say Roger Street is a regional retail, but only a small section out by the Tewksbury line is zoned properly for this, because you got to take into the fact that it has to be so far away from a school, so far away from a park, that it limits the area almost to the Tewksbury line. On Chelmsford Street, it sounds like Chelmsford Street is a large area, but because of the public schools, the public parks, really it's only a location near where the old Registry of Motor Vehicles was located that's eligible for a dispensary. So I think the map is going to be especially helpful to show you, even though you say the street, it's only a very small section of the street that's available for the facility.
Okay.
For the older members of the council, could you actually blow it up a little bit, because I can't actually see it? Thank you. Council Belanger?
I'm with you there, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, but, Mr. Chairman, to you, to either Eric or Christine, now how about, what are we going to appropriate these facilities for signage? What are we going to allow them to do? Obviously, we'd like to see things toned down to the best of our ability, if you will. So has that come to the conversation yet?
It has. Per the legislature, we cannot further impose additional sign regulations that we don't already have in the city. So we can't have more restrictive signing for a proposed dispensary than we do for a CVS. We have an existing sign code. It is pretty comprehensive. We are fairly comfortable. It won't be out of control. But we did include that they have to submit their sign package as part of their special permit.
Okay,
So that if there's anything, I mean, there are some conditions in our sign code that if it's something really wild or if it's distracting, we do have some leeway, a little bit
Have
more
some-
discretion. But we did require it to be part of their special permit packet.
Okay, well, that's good. I mean, if you want to use Patriot Care as a model, which was approved when I was on the ZBA many years ago, it's very discreetly done. And that's where I think I'd like to see things moving forward. So it's good to know that we have somewhat little control over that as well. That's good news. Thank you.
Thank you. The chair would like to recognize the Councilor Samaras joined us. Thank you, Councilor. At this point, the chair would entertain a motion to actually table this until we get the information from the administration relative to the map. So moved by Councilor Rourke, seconded by Councilor Belanger. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, it's a vote. Anything else to come before the zoning subcommittee this evening? The chair would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
So moved. Thank you. Thank you all.